Redirecting Canada's Economy. Karl Villanova will discuss this in further depth a little bit later. If you have any questions, please direct them to the committee members. They have red dots in their name tags. As you registered this morning, you were given a brochure. Within this brochure, you have a questionnaire like this. We'd really appreciate that you fill that out and leave it at the back of the room with any comments or ideas that you have for future Business Day conferences. In addition, you're also given a pad of paper. This is for after the coffee break. If you have any questions and you're too shy to come to our 2 microphones, please write it down and the person you want to direct it towards and pass it to committee members. They will be going up and down the rows. Also, as you know, everybody should have a name tag. Our term is trying to be a little bit environmentally friendly, so as you leave, could you please leave your name tag so it can be used at a further time. That's basically all that I really have to say. I will turn it over to Dr. Carter now, who will give greetings from the faculty. Please enjoy your business day.
Thank you, Paul. I'd like to welcome all of you to Business Day 1993. As you probably know, this has been an important continuing tradition in the faculty for the last 28 years, organized totally by the graduating class. The topics for discussion traditionally have been centered around current events, new directions in business, as well as dealing with some of the tougher issues facing Canadian companies. Today's topic, Adding Value, Redirecting Canada's Economy, is a particularly thought-provoking subject, given that only last week Statistics Canada came out and said the recession is over. If in fact that is the case, then we must focus our thinking on identifying new directions for Canadian businesses. Over the past few years, the impact of a slowed economy has taken a significant toll on all areas of business, as evidenced by the downsizing of large corporations, the massive layoffs in formerly profitable companies, the expulsion of prominent CEOs, and the closure or impending demise of major players in leading-edge technologies. All of this leads us to the conclusion that something is very wrong. Perhaps something has gone wrong in our thinking. That something may be the way in which we view the world we live in. In his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey discusses the difficulty of dealing with problems which cannot be resolved with quick fixes. He goes on to propose that these problems can be dealt with through coming to, in his words, view the problem in a different frame of reference, or making a paradigm shift. Maybe we need to shift the paradigm, change the way we view the market, change the way we view our companies and the way they operate in the Canadian economy. This is not always easy to do. Shifting that paradigm is sometimes very difficult, but sometimes it's necessary to deal with the problems at hand. Let me tell you a story about paradigm shifting. This is a story that was told by a naval officer about his experiences, and some of you may have run across this before. 2 battleships assigned to the training squadron had been at sea on maneuvers in heavy weather for several days. I was serving on the lead battleship and was on watch on the bridge as the night fell. The visibility was poor with patchy fog, so the captain remained on the bridge keeping an eye on all activities. Shortly after dark, the lookout on the wing of the bridge reported light, bearing on the starboard bow. "Is it steady or moving astern?" the captain asked. Lookout replied, "Steady, Captain," which meant we were on a dangerous collision course with that ship. The captain then called to the signalman, "Signal that ship. We are on a collision course. Advise you change course 20 degrees. Back came a signal. "Advisable for you to change course 20 degrees. The captain said, "Send. I'm a captain. Change course 20 degrees. The reply came back, "I'm a seaman, 2nd class. Suggest you change course 20 degrees. By that time, the captain was furious. He barked out again, "Send. I'm a battleship. Change course 20 degrees. Back came the flashing light. "I'm a lighthouse." We changed course. The point here is that the way we see the problem sometimes is the problem. Maybe we don't understand the concept completely of adding value to our product. Maybe we don't see new ways to redirect our businesses. Albert Einstein once said, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." In other words, we can't expect our businesses in the Canadian economy to function as it once did. We have to change our thinking. We, in effect, have to shift the paradigm. That's what today's discussion is all about. Shifting the paradigm, changing our thinking about how we do business, and about what we can do to add value to what we do. We need to think about how Canadian businesses operate, particularly in light of Canada's position in the increasingly competitive global markets, and in the way they do business with major economic blocs such as the EC, and of course the impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement. I hope that throughout today that you're going to become involved in the discussion. And I encourage you to feel free to actively participate. As Paul indicated to you, there are microphones. You should feel free to come forward. If you're shy, you can certainly pass your question to someone else and they will ask it. I also want to take this opportunity to commend the Business Day Committee for their efforts and congratulate them on the attendance today. Certainly, this is an event that takes months and months and months to plan, and they've worked very, very hard to organize it and also to line up the excellent speakers on today's program. So once again, on behalf of the faculty, I want to extend a warm welcome to you, say that we're happy to have you with us today, and that we hope you enjoy today's program. And at this time, I want to turn this over to Karl Villanova, who's going to introduce the topic and also introduce this morning's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Good morning. Adding value, redirecting Canada's economy is a theme for this 28th Annual Business Day. What is value? Value is the cornerstone of quality. Value represents effort and craftsmanship. In this age of growing globalization, people demand value for their dollar. They want quality, not quantity. And this quality lies in Canada's value-added industries. How does this value relate to Canada's economy? Traditionally, Canada's economy has depended on the quality of its natural resources. In the past, they were abundant and ripe for the taking. But times have changed, and we are currently facing a crisis. Canada's economic development, due in part to the difficulties faced by these natural resource industries, has failed to live up to its full potential. Our economy needs to be revitalized. We need that proverbial kick to get us started again. That kick lies in our value-added industries. In other words, Canada's future lies in redirecting its economy from more traditional pursuits to those that emphasize the addition of value to its inputs. How can we encourage these industries? What can be done now that wasn't done in the past? Quite honestly, a lot. For instance, the area of entrepreneurship has been sadly neglected. Oftentimes, the emphasis is for people to rise up in the hierarchy as opposed to building their own. Especially in Newfoundland, self-made businesses represent an untapped market. If people could be encouraged to become entrepreneurs, to create their own value-added industries, our economy would surge forward. Likewise, Canada needs to fully develop the computer and telecommunications industries. These technologically driven fields are what connects the nations to each other. Those that remain on the cutting edge will become the economic winners in a rapidly shrinking world. Manufacturers add value to their inputs. Even today, they form a significant portion of Canada's economic backbone. But in light of Canada's present economic condition, the question is this enough? As well, Canada lies at the gateway of great opportunity. The introduction of free trade represents a chance for us to further develop Canada's exporting. This trend away from natural resources must be recognized. The overall goal is to encourage the Canadian labor market to coax more production, more efficiency, and more quality. Now, this is not to say that their previous contributions have been insufficient. Quite the contrary. Without the Canadian labor force, Canada would not be where it is today. But a new approach must be taken if Canada is to remain competitive globally. What if we fail to take up this challenge? Canada will find itself falling behind economically. Others will step in and dominate these value-added niches and lock us out of a terrific opportunity. Thus, instead of merely exploiting our already depleted natural resources further, we should strive to better develop, to diversify our industrial and service bases, to encourage the industries that transform rather than harvest. Doing so will strengthen Canada's chances for economic growth and diversification. Redirecting our emphasis will allow us to remain competitive globally. It will help bring quality back to the craftsman and add value back to Canada's economy. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the morning. Shirley Seward is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Labour Market and Productivity Centre based in Ottawa. The Centre is a national institution that facilitates communication between business and labour on issues of broad social and economic concerns. It seeks to improve the operation of the Canadian labour market in conjunction with business. Ms. Seward brings over 20 years of experience in the field of public policy research. Prior to her work at the Centre, she was involved with the Institute for Research on Public Policy. She's been the Director for Studies in Social Policy, as well as the Director of Coordination and Liaison. Her work with the International Development Research Centre enabled her to initiate and develop population and socio-economic research programs throughout the world. I ask that you please give a warm welcome to our first keynote speaker for the day, Ms. Seward.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to come to St. John and to Memorial University. Newfoundland's hospitality is both legendary and unsurpassed, as you've demonstrated so warmly this morning. And I have to tell you, I'm also astonished by the weather. It's been warm and mild and sunny, and I've just left snowstorms in central Canada, so you will see me again. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to take part in Business Day 93, since your conference is addressing issues that are the very nub of the organization that I represent, the Canadian Labour Market and Productivity Centre. But I'm pleased to be here for another reason, and that's that it's the first time in many years I've been asked to participate in a conference organized by students. And I can't help but be impressed by Paul Burke and Catherine Parsons, Lisa Hollett, and the entire organizing committee that put together this conference. It gives me a great deal of hope that the future of the economy is in very good hands. You've invited me to speak about the role of business and labor in helping to redirect Canada's economy. As Executive Director of the Canadian Labour Market and Productivity Centre, I believe that our organization offers a valuable perspective on the economic restructuring debate. Ours was the first, and until very recently, the only national forum where business and labor come together to develop and discuss policy options on a wide range of economic and social issues affecting Canada's labour market. As an organization, we seek common ground and consensus on what business and labour and governments should do to improve our labour markets and our productivity performance. Thus, as you can see in the overhead, we focus not only on business labor recommendations with respect to public policy issues, but on the policies and practices of business and labor themselves. Before I turn to the substance of my presentation, I think it's important to outline a little bit about CLMPC's history. Perhaps the most significant point to make about the CLMPC is that it came about as a result of business-labor cooperation. When the federal government established this organization back in 1984, it did so after several years of combined effort on the part of the Canadian Labour Congress and the Business Council on National Issues. From its inception, CLMPC has been a joint effort desired by both business and labor and driven by both communities. Our mandate is to build consensus between business and labor on important public policy issues and on the policies and practices of business and labor. Given this mandate, CLMPC is in a unique position to influence governments, business, and labor, and to contribute to labor market productivity improvements, which are absolutely essential if we're to prosper and grow into the next century. Ours is a unique organization in many respects. CLMPC is directed by a board of directors to which belong an equal number of senior business and labor representatives. Business representatives are appointed by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Manufacturers Association, and the Business Council on National Issues. I've noticed with interest that your luncheon speaker is the chairman of the Canadian Manufacturers Association. The labor representatives are named by the Canadian Labour Congress and the Canadian Federation of Labour. At the present time, the co-chairs of the board are Bob White, the Labour co-chair, who, as you know, is the president of the Canadian Labour Congress and has been since June of this year, and Tom Savage, the business co-chair, who's the chairman and president of ITT Canada. All of our projects are directed by steering committees composed of equal numbers of business and labor representatives. Members of these committees are appointed based on their knowledge of the issues being addressed, their abilities to represent their constituencies, and other factors such as regional interests. If the organization is to have an effective voice at the public policy level, it's important that we maintain solid links with government. Thus, the board also includes non-voting representatives of all provincial and territorial governments, as well as of the federal government. Newfoundland's representative on our board from the government side is Frank Marsh, Assistant Deputy Minister in the Department of Education. And given the importance of training and education issues in any discussion of labor markets or productivity performance, 2 academic representatives sit on CLMPC's board, also in a non-voting capacity. Now let's be frank this morning. Building consensus between business and labor is not always an easy task. There are and always will be genuine and legitimate differences of opinion between the two. It requires sustained effort and energy and patience to reach agreement on important issues. But in the 8.5 years since CLMPC first came on the scene, we've established a solid reputation as an organization where labor and business can sit at the same table and discuss some of the toughest issues facing the economy. They talk frankly, they often disagree with each other, sometimes passionately, but they keep coming back. They come back, I believe, because both business and labor see the common ground. They see the value of keeping the doors open. They see concrete results coming out of the dialogue. For the first few years of its existence, CLMPC concentrated to a large extent on training and training-related issues. In fact, in just 2 weeks, we will be releasing the results of our 1991 National Training Survey. This survey breaks some new ground. For the first time, we have a survey that sets out comprehensive information on the types of training that private sector employers are providing. We look at how many employees are trained, we look at what kind of training they get, and we look at how many hours of training that they get. So the first time we really know in Canada what is happening to train the workforce within the private sector. Perhaps one of the most important accomplishments of this survey is that it was driven by business and labor. The steering committee, like all of our committees, was composed of an equal number of labor and business representatives. They worked diligently to develop definitions of training that were mutually acceptable to both sides. Together, they established consensus on survey methodology and on information requirements. Because the process has been directed by business and labor, rather than imposed from the outside, both business and labor will be able to relate to the survey findings and apply them to their particular needs. Government departments like Employment and Immigration Canada and like the two departments in Newfoundland that are concerned with education and labor market issues will also find the data valuable because the survey provides a baseline, one which is agreed to by both business and labor. The National Training Survey is also useful to bodies like the Canadian Labour Force Development Board and the newly established Newfoundland and Labrador Labour Force Development Board. It's useful also to firms who will be trying to assess their own training efforts. We're already working with our sister organization, the Canadian Labour Force Development Board, and with Statistics Canada in the planning of the next training survey, which will be conducted in 1994. So we were very busy in the training area for many years. But in the last couple of years, CLMPC increasingly has concentrated on broader economic and productivity issues that you will be looking at today. We have just recently completed a major project addressing the question of economic restructuring in Canada. While the results of that study have not yet been released, I would like to paint for you today the broad brushstrokes of the project as a prime example of the role business and labor can play in reshaping the economy of this country. We believe that business and labor are key players in the restructuring process. Both have a common interest in developing new consensus-based approaches to economic restructuring. We are convinced that approaches and strategies that build on the common ground between business and labor are much more likely to succeed than approaches or strategies which are imposed by either one or the other. It's this conviction that underlies the decision of the CLMPC board to launch the Economic Restructuring Project in January of 1992. Of course, we are realistic, and we recognize that business and labor have different perspectives on the underlying causes of the structural problems facing our economy. We also recognize that business and labor do not always agree on the most effective responses to these problems. Differences of perspective are evident, for example, in public policy areas like monetary and fiscal policy, trade policy, in particular NAFTA these days, and deregulation. From the business perspective, the concerns are competitiveness, productivity, flexibility, quality, and customer-driven approaches. From the perspective of labor, the concerns are employment and income security and equity issues. Our challenge at CLMPC is to put these two sets of concerns together. The objective of the economic restructuring has been to reach agreement between business and labor on changes needed to bring about an effective and equitable restructuring of the Canadian economy to meet the challenges of the 1990s and beyond. The first task of the committee, which was co-chaired by André Fortier, president of Kerr Addison Mines, and Fred Pomeroy, then president of the former Communications and Electrical Workers Union of Canada, was to establish common ground or a set of guiding principles for the type of economic restructuring that should occur. Let's take a look at some of these guiding principles. The first one is familiar to you. It's the very theme of your conference today. Business and labor representatives agreed that the future of the Canadian economy lies in shifting to an approach that focuses on high value added as the main competitive advantage. In its most basic terms, high value added economic restructuring takes into consideration the need to ensure returns on investment that can generate profitability, as well as higher wages, employment, and a tax base that can ensure quality public services and adequate social programs. Secondly, business and labor agreed that high productivity and improved income and employment security are equal components of a high value-added strategy. High productivity, on the one hand, generates the returns which promote income and employment security. At the same time, income and employment security strengthen the commitment to innovation, quality, and customer service so critical to productivity growth. In basic terms, in other words, unless workers feel secure that they will somehow be taken into consideration, it's very difficult to make major changes in the economy and to expect them to support it and contribute towards productivity. So they feed each other, these two concepts. The third common ground is that of equity. The costs and benefits of economic restructuring must be shared by all regions and groups. A high value-added strategy must promote greater equity for Canada's disadvantaged regions and for women, Aboriginal peoples, visible minorities, and persons with disabilities. Fourth, both business and labor agree that we share a social responsibility to sustainable development. A high value-added strategy must be pursued in an environmentally responsible land. Our goods-producing sectors and emerging new manufacturing and service sectors. Also among our strengths is our history of public investment in physical and social infrastructure and in support of public policies. So that's where the committee started, with this set of 7 guiding principles. And based on those guiding principles, the committee then decided to concentrate on 3 broad and interrelated issues: human resource development, innovation, and investment. Does that sound familiar to you? It's because it's precisely the things that you as students and certainly as business people struggle with on a day-to-day basis. The report of the committee, entitled Canada Meeting the Challenge of Change, is in the final stages of production and will be released on March 10th. In order to respect the very intensive work put in by the committee members over the past year, as well as the joint business and labor commitment which has driven the project from the beginning, I cannot at this point go into details concerning the specific recommendations in the report. You'll see those on March 10th. What I can share with you, however, are some of the highlights of the consensus building that took place as the subcommittees carried out their respective tasks. Let's first look at the issue of human resource development. The next overhead, please. Of the 3 issues scrutinized by our subcommittees, human resource development is perhaps the most widely discussed at the popular level. Everyone is an expert on human resource development. The need for a highly skilled and adaptable workforce is a common theme in television and other media treatment of the broad challenges facing our economy and our society. People make the connection between education and training on the one hand and employment on the other. As one CEO said to me recently, thousands of well-paid jobs are going unfilled. Why? because employers can't find the qualified workers they need. Our failure to train our workforce has given us an unprecedented skill gap. Simply stated, we are trying to work in the 90s with the skills of the 1960s, and it just can't be done. Employment and Immigration Canada points out that in 1986, only 23% of Canada's workers were in jobs requiring more than 16 years of education and training. In the 1990s, 44% of new jobs being created require at least that level of formal training. New technologies and new systems of work require more than technical skills. Basic skills such as the ability to understand written instructions, to write clearly and effectively, to solve problems, to communicate and negotiate, and to work with others, these skills are increasingly regarded as a requirement in many jobs and an asset in all jobs. Our experience in this country has demonstrated the value of business and labor cooperation in addressing training issues. It's not just for governments to solve. Business and labor are already in this country doing things to help train people. Examples of joint initiatives can be found at the workplace, the sectoral, and the economy-wide levels. The steel industry, for example, has established a joint management labor organization called the Canadian Steel Trade and Employment Congress. The acronym is CSTEC. For a number of years, CSTEC has focused on training displaced steel workers to help them move into new jobs. Recently, however, CSTEC is increasing its efforts in the area of upgrading the skills of the employed workforce to help workers prepare for and cope with technological change. The Sectoral Skills Council in the electrical and electronics industry in Ontario focuses on increasing the quality of workplace training in the industry. Labor and management jointly manage a sector-wide training fund for that purpose. The interesting thing is that that training program is funded by the union, by management, by the federal and the provincial governments. So everybody has a stake. In addition to joint business and labor initiatives such as these, it's important that business and labor work more closely with the education sector and with government to identify and anticipate skill needs and to improve education and training overall. Who better to identify skill requirements and training needs than those most directly involved in the workforce? And who better to help deliver and develop the training and skills needed in a community than the educational institutions based in that community? I know Memorial University takes great pride in its concrete links with the St. John's and Newfoundland and Labrador business community. This annual conference is proof of that. Input from business and labor can help ensure that government projections of training needs and the resulting policy decisions and resource allocations would be realistic and appropriate. Newfoundland, in fact, is a leader in this area, having created the first provincial-level training board in this country. Other provinces are moving in this direction. Obviously, some of the work of the Subcommittee on Human Resources has covered areas where there's already considerable common ground and agreement between labor and business. Our report, which will be published next month, put forward new areas of consensus as well as recommendations for further joint action in this area. I mentioned earlier that the three areas studied by our subcommittees are interrelated. The link is particularly clear between innovation and human resource development. According to Industry, Science and Technology, it is estimated that 85% of the technologies that will be in use by the year 2000 had not even been invented in the year 1900. Are we as a nation keeping in step with this rapid technological evolution? We can be justifiably proud of our research and development record in some sectors such as aerospace, electronics, and communications. However, we must not ignore the fact that the World Economic Forum in 1991 ranked Canada 17th out of 34 in terms of applying new technologies to our industrial activities. Our use of advanced manufacturing technologies lags behind that of other countries like the United States, Germany, and Japan. And generally speaking, our spending on research and development is lower than that in other G7 countries. It would seem to me that we must become more open to the concept of innovation as a driving force in our working lives. And as new technologies and systems of work are introduced into our workplaces in the interests of competitiveness and productivity, are we providing adequate and appropriate training to our workforce, both those currently employed and those who are still in school? The link between innovation and training is intrinsic. An untrained workforce or workers whose education and training have not kept pace with new technological skills required will be unable to contribute to the successful introduction of new technologies and innovative approaches to work. As the old song says, you can't have one without the other. The chapter of our report that deals with innovation is called Encouraging and Harnessing Innovation. I think that this is an apt choice of words. Technology and innovation are rather like a wild horse, awesome and beautiful and full of potential, but also dangerous unless harnessed and handled with care. Our report makes a number of strategic recommendations that will promote successful innovation in our workplaces with the full cooperation of business, labor, governments, and the education and training community. In both the services and the goods-producing sectors, increasingly we are seeing the involvement of labor as well as management in corporate decision-making about the introduction of new product lines or production technologies in issues such as health and safety and environmental concerns, in design and quality control, and in new approaches like teamwork. While these initiatives are not always successful, nevertheless, the concept of business-labor consensus on innovation and technology in our workplace continues to gain ground and currency in Canada. Our economic restructuring project looked at financial issues, such as access to capital for new technology-intensive firms, especially small and medium-sized businesses that often lack financial reserves of any significance. The characteristics of these firms, the very nature of their business, makes it difficult for them to access the capital investment that they need. Often the most significant asset of these firms is the highly specialized knowledge of their people. But brain power is not considered sufficient collateral for loans by most lending institutions. And banks don't always appreciate the potential market value of new products, especially when they're being developed by a small startup firm with no track record to help the lender do an assessment of risk. Some of the people in the graduating class at this university who organized the forum are already starting to try to develop small businesses. I wonder if they've had problems getting access to capital that I've just been referring to. My bet is yes. There's often a frustrating lack of comprehension between the owners of the small technology-intensive firms who have little experience in dealing with the world of business financing, and the financiers who have even less knowledge about the world of high technology. And as you know, the problems of access to adequate sources of financing are compounded by small and medium-sized firms located in economically disadvantaged regions of the country. Canadian Labour has developed a number of special funds to help provide capital for domestic investment. Among these are the Solidarity Fund of the Quebec Federation of Labour, the Working Ventures Fund of the Canadian Federation of Labour, the Crocus Fund of the Manitoba Federation of Labour, and the British Columbia Worker Opportunity Fund. In other words, labour organizations are generating money that can be used to finance investment by business people. That's what I call cooperation. The Subcommittee on Investment examined the full range of both public and private investment. This includes investment in infrastructures such as roads, water, energy, communications, transportation systems, which contribute directly and fundamentally to our quality of life. Investment in research and development, which will help shape the very fabric of our lives in ways we can't even begin to imagine. Investment in human resource development, because innovation and technological change in the final analysis are only as good as the people who apply them. Investment, finally, in social policies and programs, because economic restructuring, in our view, has a human face. Now, that is no more than a thumbnail sketch of CLMPC's economic restructuring project. The joint involvement of business and labour in Canada's economic restructuring will not end with the publication of our report. Our steering committee, indeed our entire board of directors, is firmly committed to ensuring that this is just not another report with a collection of recommendations and resolutions that are forgotten almost as quickly as they're made. The project was undertaken with a view to developing not only a set of recommendations, but also an action plan to implement the recommendations. An action plan with real goals and objectives and real people committed to making things happen and involved in the process. Now that we've established common ground and identify areas where business and labor agree upon certain actions, then the time is now for us to launch joint initiatives based on our own consensus and our own recommendations. We fully expect to be announcing a joint business-labor action plan for economic restructuring on March 10th at the same time as we release our report. I have spent considerable time this morning talking about CLMPC's economic restructuring project because it is a concrete example of the kind of contribution that business and labor jointly can make to redirecting Canada's economy. I'd like to speak now more generally about effective business-labor relationships in dealing with the challenges facing our economy and our society. In our organization, we don't take lightly the goal of business-labor consensus building. In the view of our board members, this goal is critical to achieving larger goals: increased productivity, income and employment security, and equity, sustainable development, and effective public policies. Whether we call these goals or principles, the fact is that both business and labor accept their legitimacy, their rightness, and their necessity. When we talk about business-labor consensus, we're not necessarily talking about business-labor cooperation. Sometimes cooperation can mean getting along just for the sake of getting along. Frankly, given the number of genuine, legitimate differences of perspective between the two, disagreement is pretty well inevitable on many issues. And disagreement isn't necessarily counterproductive to building the goal of building consensus on a given issue. After all, if there were no differences, then by definition, consensus would always exist. A frank and genuine exchange can often help each side understand and see the other's point of view more clearly, which sets the stage for further dialogue. We seek not only to eliminate the differences, but to foster a mutual recognition of the legitimacy of each other's roles, concerns, and need. We look for areas of agreement or common ground, and we build on them together. It's not always an easy process, and it's not generally a fast process. But the business and labor leaders who support CLMPC, who sit on our board or contribute months of their times to participate on project steering committees, these men and women are convinced that labor market initiatives have a greater chance of success if they're developed and supported jointly by business and labor. Getting business and labor together at the national level in forums like my own can facilitate and support efforts at the regional, provincial, and workplace levels. The efforts are all interrelated. Progress in Ottawa can lead to progress in St. John's. Perhaps more important, progress in St. John's can lead to progress in Ottawa. Finally, in addition to developing effective business-labor relationships, we also recognize the importance of effective business, labor, and government relationships. Government support, both in the form of facilitative public policy and some financial commitment, is critical, especially in the developmental stages of many joint initiatives. Government support often serves as a catalyst for change. Business and labor also have a role to play in the design of public policies and programs. Traditionally, there's been little agreement between business and labor in areas such as monetary, trade, and regional development policy. They often disagree on approaches to taxation, social policy, and deficits. Was it something I said? They often disagree as well as on the appropriate public policy tools to address these issues. Business tends to favor incentives, voluntary guidelines, and timetables, while labor prefers legislation, regulation, and enforcement provisions. Business and labor will continue to have their own perspectives. They will continue to influence governments based on the needs and goals of their own constituencies. This is appropriate and inevitable. But at the same time, business and labor increasingly are developing joint approaches and recommendations in public policy areas. Governments must realize that just as business and labor are developing new relationships with each other, so too must government adopt new roles and relationships with business and labor. There is no doubt that redirecting Canada's economy will require effort and time and willingness to change on the part of all groups and sectors in Canadian society. Business and labor are committed to that process by identifying areas of common ground, by agreeing on shared key principles, and by determining to promote action within their own organizations and workplaces, as well as at the public policy level. Business and labor intend to play their full part in shaping the future of Canada. Thank you very much.
I guess we will break for coffee a little bit early. The coffee break is sponsored by IBM Canada. I'd like to ask if you have any questions for Ms. Seward, please hold on to them and direct them towards her during the panel discussion. Okay? Thanks. And don't forget, 10:40 we'll start again with Dunkin Hawkins and Bill Pardy.
Welcome back to the next session of Business Day 1993. To begin this session, I will now introduce to you Mr. Peter Miller, who will be the moderator for the panel discussion. For those of you familiar with CBC Local Radio, Mr. Miller needs no introduction. He's the popular host of the CBC Morning Show, weekdays. Beyond this, he is also quite involved in community affairs, such as the Children's Miracle Network Telethon and with career days at many local schools. Please welcome now Mr. Peter Miller.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're dealing with a topic that I'm finding very interesting in some of the research, and I've managed to nail some of the students around here to get some of their thoughts. A little later on in our discussion, we'd like to hear from students and business people alike to comment on it. Shirley's address earlier has raised an awful lot of points that I think we have a special appreciation for here in Newfoundland. So think about your questions. You also were given with the program for today a writing pad, and for those of you too shy to go to a mic, when we get to that stage, just write your question down, and we'll have some runners deliver those questions for you. Also, during the questions from the floor section of the program, I'm going to try to get each of the people on the panel who are going to field questions to come over here to do it, because we have some members of the press here, and they have wired this particular podium here, and it's just too wide a gap over here sound-wise for them to record any answers that they'd care to use. So we'll try that system there. With all that said, I've heard about these business days before, but I really didn't realize they took on what they do. I mean, the scope of this one today is really quite broad. I have the pleasure of introducing two people for whom I hope you're going to have a lot of questions after. I've been chatting with them both, and they're trying their hardest to get some positive thinking going in the future of the country, and we're probably doing it at a good time, because I don't know if you heard, but last week they said that the recession is over. I remember Will Rogers once said that he said last year people said things couldn't go on like this, and they didn't. They got worse. Hopefully now that's not going to be the situation for the next 12 months. It's my pleasure to introduce Bill Pardy. He's just completing, in fact, a 2-year interchange with the Canadian Public Service Commission, Director of Community Development with the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, COA. He is president of his own company called New Venture Consultants, and he's going to speak to you in a moment. And also this morning we have Dunkin Hawkins, Vice President and General Manager of IBM Canada, mid-range systems and services with IBM Canada. He joined IBM in 1966 in Toronto, was appointed to his present position in December of 1989. He brings the view of, when you think of large companies, it's one of the largest in the world, and it's, I think the expression that he used last night was a company like many other big companies that's sort of been turned on its head of late. And so I asked him last night whether or not that's a vision of the things to come, and he said, yeah, that a lot of businesses are going to be turned on their heads in the next little while. But rather than that being a negative, that's a positive. I know that's a leap of faith to try to get you to buy that at this stage in the game, but hopefully by the time our panel discussion is over, we will have convinced you, or at least put you on the road to being convinced in that regard. So without any further ado, we're going to start with two presentations from Bill and Duncan, and we're going to start with Bill Pardy. Would you welcome him, please?
Thank you, Peter. And thanks to the students, I guess, for the invitation today and the opportunity to come and share, and for your excellent hospitality. And I've had a long involvement, I guess, with the School of Business in past lives, working with co-op students when I was doing the things I was doing in Pasadena, and I always found them to be quite an inspiration for my own work, and certainly quite an education in working with them. I learned a great deal, and have continued to learn a great deal even over the last day. When we're talking about adding value and redirecting Canada's economy, I think we got to start looking at value and what it is. And Lanita mentioned in her presentation this morning that we have to see things differently. Shirley mentioned that we're working in the 90s with 1960 skills, which I tend to believe. And 85% of the things that we're going to be using by the year 2000 they haven't even been invented yet. And we're talking about where we go and what we do and what we train people for when we really we haven't even come to the decision yet that the world is in a state of constant flux and will always be, and technology enhances and speeds up the restructuring that's taking place. But before restructuring, we must recognize, I think, where we are. We can't decide where we're going until we find out where we are. If we don't know we're in St. John's and we want to go to Toronto, then I'm at a loss to figure out how we get there. And I think part of the problem is in analyzing where we are. And if we're looking at dealing in the 90s with 60 skills, if we're looking at seeing things differently, then we certainly got to start looking at where we are differently and asking different questions, because I really believe we always get the wrong answers because we ask the wrong questions. I had a friend of mine from Scotland at a presentation last year, and he began his presentation with a quote, "Do we know what we know, and do we know what we do?" And at the same presentation, there was a gentleman from MIT, Chuck Sable, who suggested that in the coming years we've got to learn not only a new way of thinking, but we've got to learn a whole new language. Because again, if the things aren't invented, they don't have names, so we got to learn a whole new language and how we deal with this. And part of the struggle that we're seeing in society today with labor and management, with education, and with communities is basically the struggle to learn the new language. Before we can add value, we have to value what we have. And we have to understand what we have and recognize that added value comes from people and ideas. So the first thing we got to value is the people that we have and the skills that they have. Fundamental in my presentation this morning. Our focus on government solutions bring to mind a couple of quotes from Joey Smallwood, and these were written, and I found these in his books of Newfoundland. They're written in 1933, and I think they're very apropos even today. And he says, and there's two, he says, "Governments come and governments go, but the people live on forever. Their experience becoming even more enriched by vicissitudes, failures, and successes. The natural resources remain. Governments are artificial and superficial things at best. It is the genius of the people that counts. This government or that may indeed, by its policies and work, help or hinder the slow upward march of people whom it is set to govern. That is about the limit of its power. Its function at best is that of acquiheur. It is the people who count, they and their inherent qualities of minds and heart. And here we are in 1990, still trying to deal with the issues of global change, economic change, and we still haven't come to the realization, from my perspective, that it's people that count. They've just released a policy paper on community development in Nova Scotia, and my response to the Minister of Development over there, I'll read a quote because I think it begins, we've got to begin by changing our glasses. Buy a new set of glasses. If you have them, if you don't have glasses, you better get a set that shows you the world in a different context. And I say to him, let me suggest that we have to recognize that we're in a very different world. Resource industries are no longer key job providers, although they can still be key economic generators by utilizing technology and innovation. Manufacturing as an economic thrust will not provide job generation in Atlantic Canada or indeed even in Canada. Present employment levels in this sector of approximately 20% of the total workforce are forecast to drop to 8% over the next several years. Again, only with innovation and technology will we have a manufacturing sector. The service industries are the real job generators, can be evidenced by statistics emanating from the United States, where 92% of the jobs created since 1982 and 75% of the present workforce emanate from the service sector. As such, our appreciation of our real resources will have to change. Conventional approaches to economic development and job creation are basically obsolete. Once we recognize this, we will understand that employment, development, and business activities will be dependent on fully developing our human resources. building an understanding of these issues, encouraging confidence to cope with dramatic change, and creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurship and small-scale business development are the keys to the future economic well-being of this region. And again, looking at entrepreneurship, which is part of our topic today, and what is entrepreneurship? We tend to think of entrepreneurship in the context of business development. We tend to develop programs of business management and business planning and tout them as entrepreneurship programs. But entrepreneurship to me is something different than that. It's something that's inside each and every one of us. It's a spirit, and we talk about the spirit of entrepreneurship, and we focus on the entrepreneurship and not the spirit, because it is an inherent spirit in all of us to do something, to accomplish something, to make some achievement in life. And that to me is what entrepreneurship is about. It emanates from people, from human resources, and if you look at examples like China, like Eastern Europe, where probably they've got the most vibrant entrepreneurial cultures in the world right now. They just come out of a 50-year environment of communism where business and entrepreneurship weren't even in their language, weren't in their dictionary. So if it's not something that's internal, it's not something that's spiritual, that's inside, then I don't know what it is. It certainly didn't come from their learning about business principles and practices, albeit that's important as well. The challenge for us in our society is find ways to encourage this spirit, this inherent quality that's in everyone, to have people look within themselves, to value their own talents, and it comes back to value what they have, their own abilities. We talk about illiteracy as if it means that people don't have intellect. People do have intellect, and very creative. We live in one of the most dynamic and creative environments in the world, albeit we probably have lower standards of education in many ways. It doesn't mean that people aren't able. It's just that the skills and the talents they have were developed for another time, and we have to rechannel them. Not change them, not take them away, but rechannel them into a different environment. We've got to look at the environment, and this is where your glasses come in, and in the context of the world, in the context of the global change that's taking place. Whether we like it or not, it's there, it's happening. Free trade and trade enhancement and integration of trade patterns are happening and will continue to happen because of the way the world is structured. And that won't change. You can't stop it. You can't build walls big enough to reach up to stop the satellites from broadcasting in the kinds of things that are taking place. You can't keep it out. And so we've got to look at the context of the world. We've got to look at the context of where we're at and how we fit. And then the opportunities for employment, the opportunities to do something creative, the opportunities to provide well-being for our families will become more evident. We also need a society that's supportive and an environment that's supportive to nurture this spirit of entrepreneurship. And in my response, and I want to share this with you because I think it's, again, appropriate, the environment includes literate and skilled workers in information and technical industries. It needs a supportive regulatory environment with understanding and thoughtful government employees who can assist and support those that venture into new enterprises. It will have to have a citizenry who understand that development is their responsibility as well. The challenge is to identify people's inherent skills and talents and find ways to utilize them. Attitudes will have to shift to support those who decide to take the chance of doing something for themselves. People will have to realize that they have a responsibility for themselves, their families, and their communities. It is not only government, politicians, or businesses that have to contribute to economic development. There is a role for everyone. Okay? And that has to be part of society, because if we don't have a supportive society, how are you going to have entrepreneurship? We have to have the understanding and support for those people that want to do things differently. We have to, as I said, a regulatory regime which supports it, and people who enforce the regulatory regime who understand it. We have to have, and this comes then from having a flexible bureaucracy and dealing with regulation and dealing with the needs of society and understanding the constraints and the difficulties that people in business are facing, as well as people in the workforce. Then we have to have an education that enables it. And I think we've, again, if we're going to start using new language, looking at the world differently, then we've got to revisit education and see what it means in 1990. See what its role is. Because if everything else is changing, the way we approach education has to change as well. It's not only about literacy, it's not only in entrepreneurship, it's not only about business methodology, but it's a broad-based awareness needed in communities of economics and an understanding of the role that business plays in our society and economics plays in our society. And that's not out there. I know from my dealings in community, there's a void, a big void. And the interesting thing is, if we only deal with the education system we have, then we're going to miss 70% of the people who aren't in any kind of formal education system. So we've got to build broad-based education programs that reach out, not that draws in, that reaches out and touches everybody in our society. Business is only one of the spin-offs for entrepreneurship development. As I said, business and economic growth. And part of the environment, I think, comes from having an educated and literate workforce, and also looking at the ways we regulate, the way people do business, the way people live. And I'll use by way of example some statistics coming out of Central America, where they're in probably one of the biggest, we're in a recession, well, they're in one of the biggest economic booms that they've ever seen. And Chile is leading the way with the fastest growing economy in the world, so I'm told, according to the articles that I've read. And interesting enough, there were two things that I saw in these articles that I think were pertinent to the change that's happening. And I'm not suggesting their economies are on par with ours. I'm saying they're an upward swing in their economies and change taking place. And there's two things very evident. One is the literacy levels of all the countries in Central and South America. The lowest one on the scale, which had the lowest level of growth, was Bolivia with 78% literacy. One of the highest was Chile with 93%. And as I said, the fastest growing economy in the world. There's something relative to the change that's taking place. But obviously, they've been becoming educated for a long period of time. It didn't happen by just educating people. It happened because they changed the way the regulatory role of government and allowed a more open type of atmosphere to happen in the marketplace. And I think that's important. That's key, fundamental. And again, I'm not suggesting, because the challenge might be, well, they're not doing it right either. I'm not saying that at all, but they are doing something different when they get such an upward scale. And the two things come to mind. We live in a country where right now we have, if we believe our statistics again, anywhere from 60 to 65% literacy. In Newfoundland, we're less than 50% literacy if you believe the statistics. In Atlantic Canada, about 48% of the people are functionally illiterate. We have a regulatory environment, I think, which is restrictive at best, and as a result, we have the economic climate that we've got, and these things have to change. Fundamentally, we've got to start looking at the value of people and how do we improve the value of people. If we improve the value of the education that people have, then we'll improve the value of the economic climate that we have. There's no doubt in my mind about that, the linkage. The importance of small business to the economy can't be negated as well. 86% of the new jobs created in Canada between 1980 and 1989 came from the small business sector. Newfoundland, or in Atlantic Canada, there were 90% of the new jobs created by small business. 56% of these came from businesses with less than 5 employees. In Newfoundland, 83% of the new jobs created came from businesses with less than 5 employees. Very significant and important to the local economy. I think the other side of that equation is that after 6 years, only 33% of the business are surviving. After 11 years, only 20%. Part of that can be looked at because of changing marketplace and all that, but I think a lot of it, again, deals with the environment in which small business have to operate. The attitudes towards business and the attitudes towards people that want to do things differently. So entrepreneurship is very important. It's an inherent trait, I think, in everyone. We have to find ways to draw it out and encourage those that want to do something from a business orientation. Small business is important to the economy, very important, significant, as is the service sector. And what I want to then look at is some of the trends that are happening that really makes us rethink and rediscover just exactly what this is all about anyway. As I said, one of the trends happening as small business. And someone once said, well, if you want to start a small business, you buy a big one and wait. And I don't believe that's happening at all. I think there's some very interesting and exciting things happening in the large corporate world. And I've been, in my own way, following IBM, and I think there's some very exciting things happening in the way they're reoriented and reorganizing, taking advantage of what small business principles can do for large corporations in an integrated mode. I think small business is taking such a focus in the economy because, number one, it's flexible and responsive to change and allows you to turn very quickly. It also enables people to achieve, I think, some sense of satisfaction, which comes back to the inherent quality in everyone to want to do something and do something better for themselves, for their families, and for society. The service sector, as I said, is one of the biggest things that's happening in the world. The service sector is not just McDonald's. The service sector is also software and companies like Microsoft, who just happens to be the largest, I think, one of the largest corporations in the world. It has a gross net worth as much as General Motors, but it doesn't have 70,000 factories like General Motors. They make nothing, they just sell information. The information is transferred on floppy disks. That's service as well. Canada, I'm told, in a recent article, has one of the biggest pools of software talent in the world, or in North America. The sad fact of the matter, the software industry is underdeveloped here. It's being developed in other areas of the world. And again, the supportive environment's not there because we haven't seen the world in the same fashion as other people have seen it. So we do have the value in society to build on where the world is going. Engineering and business consulting are just other aspects of service sector that we can provide as opportunities, education in particular. And I had a little discussion at break time with some of the students there. The necessity and the requirement for visual aids to teaching and education, right from primary school right through, is significant. There's very few out there with a focus on developing visual material for education. Integration, as I said, there's big changes taking place. In 1980 saw a whole group of mergers. I think that were the first attempts at integration. What we're seeing now, and Business Week this week had an article they call it virtual corporations, where they're talking about the integration of different dimensions of small business who come together to do a task and then disappear, separate and go their own very ways. They bring to the table different kinds of expertise that are needed at a particular time, whether it's in manufacturing or service. That's the wave of the future, I think, in business integration. And it's got to be the wave of the future for a place like Newfoundland, where we have to tap the global marketplace. We can't do it with small-scale businesses of 5 people, but we can do it if we integrate and build on the strengths that numerous small businesses can bring. And I think that's where we've got to start looking at. We've got to start looking at the restructuring that's taking place, the restructuring in the information, and the importance of the client and customer. And if you look at the way the world is shaping, and Mr. Hawkins talked last night about how little importance the hardware is now in industry, and whether the hardware is computers or airplanes. If you read the Globe and Mail the day before yesterday, you realized that the airlines make more money of the reservation service or information than they make from flying planes. That's a significant shift in thinking, a significant shift that we've got to make as well. And as a result of that, there has to be more focus on human resources. The approach to economic development, as a result of all this, has to change. And I can assure you, bottom-up won't happen unless top-down opens up. Because you can't build from the bottom if there's resistance at the top. And so there has to be change, not only at the bottom, there has to be change at the top as well. We've got to look at relationships differently, not only from the point of view of the corporate world, but the world we live in as well. And very interestingly enough, in Canada, you're seeing a growing recognition in southern Ontario, the close ties of their economy with Michigan and New York. Got nothing to do with Canada at all. It got to do with economic patterns and where people live. That's significant shifts that we've got to recognize. We've got to look at how our fit, what's the Atlantic Canada fit with Eastern Seaboard US in a global marketplace? That's where we've got to look. We've got to start developing linkages and collaborating rather than competing, and Shirley talked about this morning, and that's quite a challenge because we all have to learn the language of the other group, and that's quite difficult. competition, not among ourselves, but competition in a more global world. We need to gather information, intelligence on demographics and the change, because we have to know where we're at, where we fit, and who we are. Deal with the more global issues. So we need information, intelligence, because again, we can't build an economy locally if we don't know what's happening globally. We have to build and gather information about local human resource. And I do work in communities, and we go in with studies all the time. We find out the average education in whatever community I go in is grade 9, grade 11, or grade 6. It really matters not. We still don't know anything about the people that live in those communities. What are their skills? What are their talents? What are their likes and dislikes? And what have they got to offer the world in which they live? No one's doing that, or very, very limited amount of that being done. It's the first and primary effort that has to happen. Before we can develop strategies, we've got to know who we are, and where the world is going, so then we can strategize where we fit. We've got to have, as I said, awareness to the value of local business to the economy. We've got to understand and begin the process that Shirley and her group has started right across the board, where we have cross-sectorial discussions, and I'm involved in a whole group of them, in technology in Nova Scotia, in film and video, looking at how we get the other players in this game, in particular in the case of film and video, how do we get the development people and the financiers to understand that collateral is also in intelligence. That's quite a challenge. But the first thing you have to begin discussion so that we both understand, or everybody understands, where they're coming from. Education is no different. Where does education fit in the world of business? There's got to be a discussion so that both sides understand their own language and the new language that's evolving. We also got to understand what each other's needs are, and that's not only from the macro level, that's from the micro level as well. What are the needs of people who live in communities in rural Newfoundland? What are the individual needs of those people? And how do we fulfill those in society? That's the bottom line of what economics is all about. The rest of it's all invented. We invent things to suit or fill the needs of what people have or what their expectations are. And that's quite a change. Hay Consultants did a report last year which paralleled the Porter report for the federal government, I think was much more open and telling. And they suggested we're looking at not a 1 year or 2 year recession, we're looking at a 10-year restructural shift. And they also say the research has shown it takes 15 years to change social and cultural patterns in response to technology. That's significant, and we're well into that. We started this whole shift, not yesterday, we started this whole shift more than 15 years ago, and we've seen phenomenal change. The real challenge, and I want to leave you with the challenges, okay? The challenge is to look at the world differently, value ourselves and our environment, understands our needs, both individually, locally, and globally, relate our location to developing areas of the world, vis-a-vis, in our case in Newfoundland, or in your case in Newfoundland, where we fit. With a 4.5-hour time difference between California and Europe, I think we have some strategic advantage in processing information in the hours when they can't be in business. There's some real interesting dimensions if we're going to get into a real information era and look at information as the economic generator of the future. We have to develop strategies to take advantage of location resource and help us develop suitable education and infrastructure needs. We keep building infrastructure. Are we building the right infrastructure or the wrong? Because we're asking the wrong questions. We have to develop society, and again it comes back to education, and encourage people to be less resistant to change and more flexible in their thinking. We have to be optimistic, and Mr. Ritchie, who's a chairman, or was the chairman of the Bank of Nova Scotia, suggested that we're on the verge, and this happens every 50 or 60 years, on the verge of a long wave of growth, is what he called it, and I really believe that. I believe we're in a phenomenal period of change that's going to evolve into a long period of growth and development, and opportunities abound for people like yourselves who have an education, who have an opportunity to have a vision, and the challenge is to convince people that they have a role to play at the community level and a contribution to make. And you have a contribution to make, but you won't make the contribution if you only look down, as I say, at your feet, if you only look at the environment in which you live. You have to look at the outside environment as well, whether it's outside of St. John's, outside of Newfoundland. Find out what's happening and see what are the opportunities that you can take advantage of no matter where you live. It's possible, it's able, it's an exciting time. It's really, I think, a great time for young people to be graduating. Don't worry about the job situation. Go out there and make a change so there are jobs. create your own. That's the message. And we're all going to have to learn to do that in time, because there will be no secure jobs. The world is changing. If we're looking at 85% of things being invented in the next 10 years, then I'm sorry to say the people that have security better look around, because there is no security in anything anymore. The only security is in your own value, your own skills, and your own talents, and your own willingness to use them to make the world different. Thank you.
Bill Pardy, who is president of New Venture Consultants. Thanks, Bill. There's one thing that he said that I really identify with when he said we got to get a new pair of glasses, because they've been telling me I should be in bifocals for months now. A friend of mine works in a carpentry shop here in town, and they refer to everybody else and the place they work as the butcher shop. And I noticed this week there's kind of a really good story in the news about Saunders and Howell in Clarenville landing a big contract to sell some furniture on the mainland. And what I found really interesting about that is it's pretty well up what Bill has been telling us, because here we had a traditional company in Newfoundland, and I heard that it was named after the first carpenters that worked for the company, and not the people that set up the business. But the first two guys that worked were Saunders and Howell. So if you had a job to do, they sent them out. And that's how the name was derived. But the company has said that the reason that they've landed this contract now for furniture in Nova Scotia is quite simply because they've got the best equipment and they have the best in skills as far as the workforce is concerned. So I think on a small scale here in Newfoundland, we've got an example of one company that's got its head in the direction, the sort of direction that Bill is referring to there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce now Dunkin Hawkins. He's Vice President, General Manager of IBM Canada.
Thank you, Peter. Let's make one thing abundantly clear before we get cracking here. That recession is over. A round of applause. Because a recession, folks, is half structural and the other half is the way you and I feel about the economy and where we're going and jobs and how people are getting treated out there. And I can tell you from my experience over the past bunch of months in the business that I'm in, the huge fourth quarter that we had in 1992 at IBM Canada, and just in looking in the stores and seeing what was going on in the stores around about Christmas time, and talking to the retail companies that I do business with across the country, the consumer is leading this charge. The consumer is leading this economy out of the recession. So hang on to your ticket stubs. You just may be at the bow wave of something really, really great. Because you know, when we pop out of one of these things, things are really spectacular. I think about what's been happening with the IBM company over time. Does anybody want to hear anything about what's happening at IBM? Everywhere I go, what are you doing down there? Whether you're shareholders or not, you've got to look at companies like General Motors and IBM and the big bellwether companies. But I think what I saw outside here in terms of the exhibits, what I hear in terms of the words that surround new job creation, not just in Newfoundland, but right around North America, small business is where it's at. I'm not saying that large business isn't good and doesn't have its place, but as I think Bill said, 93% of all new job creation in Newfoundland is in small companies. And I think you're going to see that as a very, very strong trend, not just here, but right across probably the world, I certainly know in terms of North America. So think thoughts about being entrepreneurs. Think thoughts about making short-term decisions with quick paybacks. Think terms of not necessarily having now I'm 27 years with IBM, so I mean, it's pretty tough for me to say, but because I certainly, when I graduated from school, I anticipated joining IBM and being there for the long haul. I'm absolutely certain that today more people will be joining smaller firms and trying to develop marketable skills that will take them from firm to firm to firm within a certain skills category. Anyway, good morning. I'm thrilled to be here, let me tell you. I've always loved Memorial University. We've got 40, 50 folks in my organization that graduated from mostly the business school, about 70%, the rest from engineering. and we would probably have 2/3 of the people that operate out of our St. John's office from Memorial. A number of others are in the rest of Atlantic Canada, and they're in Montreal, and they're in Toronto and points west. So it's always been good to be stay close to Memorial, because the good graduates from this good school are awfully good for the IBM company. So I want to thank Lisa for dropping by, and I guess it was last fall, to ask me to come down here, because I want to make sure that we maintain this relationship while we go through our little bit of a trough. We had been in the habit in the past of bringing about 20 of you folks on your co-op program aboard each and every work term. We're in a bit of a hiatus on that now, but I can tell you, if you buy my pitch here, when I tell you about how well the IBM company in Canada is doing, you'll know that it'll be 20 and then some in the not too distant future. Now, as you know, the theme of this conference is adding value, redirecting Canada's economy, and that's a great, upbeat, forward-looking concept. And I can tell you, if you've been reading any of the newspapers, that over the past couple of weeks, that taking a look at IBM's corporate earnings, I'm ready to move on to anything. Anything forward-looking, anything redirecting, anything positive, upbeat, I'm part of it. And I'm very ready, too, to talk about the theme for today's conference, and I'm going to show you on a chart that kind of almost didn't make it through the fire, as you're going to see, because it doesn't really show the color that I wanted it to show when I brought it down here, but the fact that adding value is the central theme of the resurgence, the restructuring of the IBM Corporation, and most definitely in our organization. As I hope you've seen in recent newspapers, IBM Canada had a very strong 1992, with double-digit domestic sales growth at 15%, improved customer satisfaction, record exports over $4 billion manufactured in Canada and exported, and solid profitability. Now, we did decide to take a provision that became a part of the $6 billion write-down that the corporation took, but that shouldn't obscure the fact that we met all of our targets in the Canadian corporation, those being revenue growth and profitability, return on assets, and cash, for all of those in the business program. And I guess all of you are. And I know that we're positioned with the kinds of things we've been doing over the past couple of years for future growth and a very, very strong 1993. My topic over the next few minutes is creating customer value, the competitive advantage, I believe, of the 90s. My particular focus will be on the importance of the customer relationship and the value equation. You'll notice that each speaker's got a different twist to what value is, and hopefully what you do over the course of the day is develop in your own mind a very clear picture of the various views and what you would perceive to be the kind of value that you would want to drive out of the product that you will represent when you hit the workforce. Because I want to distinguish between customer satisfaction and quality and what value is in this presentation. I'd like to begin by giving you a brief snapshot of what's going on in my industry, because that's going to tell you a little bit about what's happening at the IBM company. We are not alone. It's changing quickly, and the change really is focusing on that value equation. And I want to tell you a little bit about the actions that IBM Canada is putting in place to meet the challenge. First of all, let me give you a couple of numbers here, and it's kind of important to focus on this. We worldwide did about $65 billion in revenue in 1992. Now, out of that, we even though this kind of gets obliterated in the analysis, we generated about $2.6 billion in net before tax profit. Now, that's not good enough. That's about 4%, and no one would invest in a company that drives a 4% return. And then we had to write off almost $8 billion in assets. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about how that all comes to pass and why that is almost structural now in this industry of ours. We are literally in IBM Canada in the midst of totally transforming our entire business to meet the challenge of this 90s marketplace and adding value and off the focus on the hardware product. I don't want to dwell on the realities of the marketplace too much, but it's worth touching on a few numbers, I believe. 5 years ago, we had 10,000 competitors worldwide in the information technology business. Today we've got 50,000. And business students will recognize that as the symptom of an industry that has very low entry barriers. What that causes, folks, when you've got that many people out there generating product, and as you hit the maturing point in an industry and a recession altogether, you wind up with enormous dynamics. Shrinking margins for sure as people scramble to get product out of their undercapacity manufacturing facilities. And let me just expand on that one for a moment. In 1992, the IBM Corporation will shed about 55% of its manufacturing floor space. That's heavy, heavy, heavy stuff. In 1990, I'd mentioned $65 billion worth of revenue. In 1990, the IBM company across the world generated the $65 billion in revenue, $44 billion of which was hardware. In 1992, we generated the same $65 billion, so very little worldwide growth in revenues, but 30 billion of that was hardware. And by the way, at the same time, with the price performance that's been happening in the business, that is, the price of the same product or enhanced product going down each year, year over year, between 1990 and 1992, while we shrunk by 30% in terms of revenue from hardware, we increased our customer shipments by 25%. In addition, in generating that 25% more product, we can now do it because of the technology in developing products, do it with 55% less manufacturing capacity. Kind of scary. Now, add to that the cycle time improvement in our industry. Used to be you could bring out a PC and it would sit on the market for 3 years. Now it sits there for 3 months. So when we tool the plant in Don Mills to build something, we got to retool it in 4 months. And as you folks in accounting know, we're allowed to write off our capital investment in those lines over 5 years. That's what causes way. And I can say in Canada here, our restructuring is having a profound and a very positive effect on our Canadian operations. So let's go back here a little bit. What caused all this requirement for restructuring in Canada? In 1991, we lost money for the first time, and as I just mentioned, going through all of those numbers, there was more than just a recession at work. We've gone through those things before and made money before. As a matter of fact, we always thought our business was recession-proof because if you bought a computer when you were kind of fat and happy as a corporation, you equally would buy a computer if you wanted to reduce your costs as you went through a recession. Customer needs have shifted. I can tell you that there are more companies out there buying computer products now that are buying them based on the commodity that they really are from those 50,000 competitors. And they're getting their advice and counsel on how to implement those products from another portion of the industry altogether, where they used to buy everything from the IBM company or from Unisys or Honeywell or any one of our good competitors. So we needed to restructure to compete, and we did that kind of in a couple of ways. The first thing is to get in line. We created a model comprising the best-of-breed competitors in each of the businesses that we deal in, and those are the PC business, the mid-range computer business, the mainframe business. We took a look within those, and telecommunications and software. We took a look within those at our finance department commitment, the marketing staff size and administration, the investments in all these things. And we looked at assets and revenues and the number of people that we had in those businesses, and we found we were totally out of line. So on a base of about 7,000 people in Canada that were delivering the products and services to our customers, we needed to move 2,200 folks out of the business, and we did that in 1992. That was in the marketing and service side of our business alone. Of the remaining 4,800 folks in marketing and service, we redeployed 1,000 from messing around with this hardware that is shrinking in terms of its dollar importance to us into the services side of our business. The services side being that side of the business that generates the value to the customer, that takes our product and implements it in a way that creates a more positive bottom line for the accounts that we serve. We also had huge expense cuts. Year over year over year, 1991 to today, we've been pulling, in real terms, 11% per year out of our cost base in expense. We've done that in a number of ways, and not the least of which is pulling the people out of the business. We've had huge asset reductions in real estate, and those of you who have read about it or heard about it, the first thing we did when we had to do that, to signal to our employees and to our customers that we were serious about this, we put our country club in Toronto up for sale. That should bring a smile to most people's faces. What the heck are you doing with a country club? And by the way, for sure, in these days, in the 90s, there is no reason in the world you ought to have one. So with the expense side in retreat, 11% year over year being pulled out, we've got the folks down to where we're lean, mean, and we're competitive with anybody in the marketplace. We next decided to take a look at how we approach the marketplace. And this is the positive side of this story, because what it does is it takes us from and takes us to in terms of our whole marketing approach. So we dealt with a group of our customers and a consultant, and we came up with a 5-step agenda that was going to take 3 years to transform our business. Let me just briefly go through what those focus elements were. First of all, customer value. Oddly enough, the theme of this particular conference, so we hit the first one the same as you folks did. Very, very topical. Market segmentation. We had been a company that was all things to all people, and it was time to start focusing on markets where the market believed or perceived value in our products. Profit. Empowerment was the next, and what we had to do was take a bunch of folks who were out there selling, and I don't want to pick on anybody selling hardware because one of the guys is here today, but we were selling hardware. We had to turn that thing around and move our sales folks and our systems engineers around the other side of the desk and get them to represent the customers back to us in terms of what they need from us and what value they need to derive from our products. Skills was the fourth one. And you'll hear in a moment the kind of money that we're investing in changing those skills. Don't forget, we pulled a bunch of folks out of the business, and we redirected the efforts of a bunch of others, and then of the total out there, we did an awful lot of re-educating. So new and deeper skills to really deliver the value that is in our products, I should really say. And the fifth one is re-engineering the processes. Don't forget, when you pull 2,200 folks out of a base of 7,000, there are a bunch of jobs. Let's just assume the 7,000 showed up at 9 o'clock and left at 5, and they've been doing something. So with that work gone, and by the way, revenue demands hadn't gone down, there were processes that had to change. There were some things that we had to stop doing that weren't focused directly on the customers. So in a skinny down IBM, how do you do all the right things, and how do you make sure that you take care of that 3-month cycle time? So we pulled a lot of things out of the business. But today, really, I don't want to get into those things. I want to focus on the creating customer value. Because in many respects, if people don't perceive that you're delivering value, nothing else really matters, and you're going to see that a little bit better in a moment. Let me give you a quick sense on this chart that I mentioned of how important today's theme is to the IBM company in Canada. Tom, if you wouldn't mind hitting the switch on that chart. And then a little later on, we'll get into what my definition of value is, what our definition of value is, and I would guess that that definition is more portable than not, and what we can do about it. I don't expect that you folks can read that chart. In fact, the very line that I wanted to highlight is the one you can't read, because we're not being secretive here. But this is a chart that we've been using throughout the restructuring of the IBM company. We call it the strategic framework, because you got to start somewhere, folks. You got to compare all of the actions you're taking against something that you believe in, and you begin at the bottom in these building blocks with the values that we have always had in 75 years in the IBM Corporation: respect for the individual, our employees, best customer service, and pursuit of excellence, and we don't want to ever waver from those three. That stroke out says to be the best at delivering customer value. That's supposed to be a highlight, but we needed another 1,000 watts in that bulb to really draw that out. For our customers and all those with a stake in our success, so in being the best at delivering value, and I hope by the time I'm finished you'll understand what I mean there. The mission statement, that's what we want to be. What we believe in, what we want to be, those little balloons out the side tell you that story. Let me read the mission statement because that's what we're all about. IBM is in the business of helping people solve problems, that's adding value, folks, through the use of advanced information technologies. IBM creates value by offering products and services that help customers succeed. Bottom line. These include services, software, systems, products, and technologies, although bottom line is boring. What's important is that we go and understand what the customer needs to be more profitable and go and see if our technologies can't help them deliver that and then go and make it happen. Strategy, competitive solutions, obviously, the empowered group of people I talked about, and responsiveness under a framework of market-driven quality and finally our measurements that include customer satisfaction, employee morale, and those other things that I mentioned that are kind of important too, return on assets, cash, and all of the other things that keep us going year over year over year. And out of all of that, we drive satisfied shareholders, obviously, proud employees, enhanced communities, for sure, successful business partners, that is what that says, the people that work with us in this endeavor, and very, very definitely delighted customers. Thanks, Tom. Anyway, I wanted to show you that chart, even though I know beyond the first row you couldn't read a darn thing, to show you that we're very serious and that I didn't just write this little presentation here to fit in with your theme. We are all about figuring out how to drive value. So as you can see, it is a very integral part of what we're trying to do around IBM Canada. Now I want to get into what value is. Value is the added competitive advantage you bring to your customer. And that isn't a bad definition for somebody like IBM who sells to people who are in business. You can derive a number of other definitions, but basically it is value is the added competitive advantage you bring to your customers. In any transaction, in any industry, the customer defines the value. That's the other bit, and that's why you got to get out there and talk to folks. That could be faster delivery, because a faster delivery means quicker cycle time for the kinds of things they're trying to do and a faster return on investment. Could mean the lowest price. In a commodity transaction, you ought to be. And I'm going to give you an example in a moment of a pump, Peter, where there are businesses out there that operate in a lowest price environment. They deliver the lowest price, and still, that is the value that the customer expects. It could be to solve a problem, which is a higher value add opportunity. It could be to save money in an operation in being able to extract expense from the way a business operates. It could be to enhance the product, to help them grow revenue. It could be just to improve productivity, which is important in itself, or any combination of those or any other factor or factors that translate into lower costs or more revenue for our accounts and therefore more profit. And if you can't paint your product into that scenario, you ought not to be selling it to that account. Quality, if you wonder where that fits into all this, is a given. We've been at it a long time. There are a lot of folks out there that develop and manufacture mousetraps, and there are hundreds of very high quality mousetraps out there. It's assumed that your mousetrap is a high quality mousetrap until you prove it otherwise. So quality, folks, is what you build into your product, and as I say, in 1993, it is a given. Value is what your customer takes out of the product, what they derive from the product, and here's where you come in. Delivery of value requires a dedication to help your customer maximize their ability to derive value from your products through training and education, information, application, and consultation. That is the definition and the extrapolation of the definition that we at the IBM company are all about. Taking our products, which are, I can tell you, very high quality products, to the marketplace in a way where we're trying to interpret our customers' requirements through consultation with them and in training and educating them on the use of those products to create demand for more and more and more. I'm going to give you a personal example here, and this was kind of initiated in a discussion I had that began last night and ended this morning with, not that we went all night with this thing, with Peter, because there's a, and this is a retail example. Let me get away from IBM for a moment, and it's a personal example. I've got a cottage or a camp in Ontario, and it needs for its water supply a little pump, a little cast iron pump with a motor on it. Now, the pump that in my cottage was probably the wrong pump when it was installed, and so through the subsequent years of abuse, packed it in, and I had to go out and find a new one. And I know nothing about that, pumps or anything else, and of course, being, I suppose I should have called a plumber, right? That would have been the true sense of value add, and there's a probably, I just thought of that now. Why didn't I do that, Peter? I wouldn't have had a story. Anyway, there's a chain called Beaver Home Improvement Centers or whatever in Ontario, and I zipped out there and I saw the department manager in the area that sold hardware kind of things, and I said, I'd like to buy a water pump, and he said, you're not connected to town water? Typical Torontonian, Peter. So he didn't have any, not only didn't he have a pump, but he wasn't going to help me one iota, and yet this is a guy that works in the building, so I wasn't happy about that. But, okay, I mean, I'm sure that this is only one Beaver employee. I'm not picking on that chain, but it gives you a sense of where they are in this value chain, where they sit relative to my needs as a customer. And I will suggest that over time, any company that takes that attitude towards somebody who walks in to ask for something that's not in that store ain't going to be around for a whole long time. And again, this is Beaver's owned by Molson, so I suppose they got deep pockets and keep on going. But anyway, I'm not picking on them, as I said. Next, I went to Canadian Tire, and you're all familiar with Canadian Tire, and I zipped in there, and there are 6 black pumps and 6 red pumps, and they're all kind of faced up on the shelves, all in their boxes. And now, what do? So I call the person over that's wearing that red and white striped shirt, and I say, well, I'd like to talk a little bit about pumps. And the person proceeded to read the box, which I'd already done many times, both colors. And so I was kind of nowhere, and by the way, the price of these things were like $239 and $259, so I had to assume that the red pump, being the $259 pump, was so that's the one I wanted to focus on, because I'm not cheap, right? And I want to be back. So I left. I mean, I had no idea whether to buy a red pump or whatever, because I suppose you may or may not know, but it's important where the pump sits and how far you pump water and how much water you need and all that stuff anyway. So I shouldn't have been looking, that's for sure. So I went next to Lansing, Lansing Bildal, which is right next door to Canadian Tire, and I walked in there and somebody ran over, and I mean literally, because I had been fumbling around now for about 15 minutes trying to find something, and the question was, can I help you? And I said, I doubt it very much. I'm looking for a water pump. And he said, well, we don't sell them, but there's a place up in Richmond Hill called the Pump House. Boy. And they sell pumps. And I said, thanks, if you wouldn't happen to, yep, right over to the phone book, and gave me the address, and I thought, geez, I'm on the way now. And I drove up to Richmond Hill, and I pulled in, and I pulled up to front of this place, and I could see, guess what? 3 colors of pumps, including black, red, and blue, and 3 different prices, and they were about the same. But now you see I'm in an industrial mall. I'm not out on Main Street. I don't have the expensive square footage if I run this kind of an operation. And I walk in, and he says, you want a pump? I'm here. I said, I sure do. He said, well, how far is the pump off the water? I said, well, about 4 feet. It's in my boathouse. Good. How far do you have to push the water? And meanwhile, he's got a red pump out of the box, the expensive one, right? And he's putting all the fittings on this thing as I go along, because they have to be customized for this particular application. When I was all done, he said, okay, it's cash or charge. I mean, I don't even remember ordering the thing. Fact of the matter, it was there, and he was lugging it out to stick it in my trunk while, and this, I exaggerate if I say this whole thing took 10 minutes. And by the way, there were other people milling around waiting to get that thing done. Now, what do we learn here? I mean, it's kind of a fun story, and I have a little bit of fun with the thing. Beaver's out of whack. Canadian Tire's probably on the right track, but you see, I paid the same amount of money for that pump at the pump house, $259, as it was at Canadian Tire. So Canadian Tire ain't going to win in this business either. As soon as people start figuring out that they can get high-value service from somebody else, and you know, quite frankly, again, if Canadian Tire wants to be in that business forever and always, they ought to think of something around $239 or $229, and then they've got something. Then they've got that low, in my example before, they've got that low price point all locked up. So if somebody that knows a little more about pumps than I do wants to buy a pump, they'll go Canadian Tire. Somebody who needs a little bit of value add will go to the pump house. And I suspected afterwards that the reason this guy started bolting on all these little toys on, you know, the fittings on this pump was because people had been in there before, picked his brain, and then went back to Canadian Tire and bought had it been cheaper, or somewhere else where the pumps are cheaper. Anyway, that value. The value for the manufacturer in this case selling through a retailer is in finding a retailer that cares enough about knowing about the pump, knowing about the applications of the pump, finding out from me, because all that person did was ask questions for 5 minutes and 2 minutes of assembly, and I was out of there. That's what's very, very important. They got close to me, they got close to the application requirement that I had, and put together something that's still running today, miraculously. In the IBM Canada context, we've restructured our marketing and service business to deliver value. We redeployed to services, and let me explain that just a wee bit. There are neat advanced applications out there, electronic data interface, multimedia, image, all kinds of computer, telephone interface software, all things that have you people going, what is he talking about? Which is exactly the problem that we've had in the past. What am I talking about? And until you leave the products on the shelf, go and visit the customer and go and find out the kinds of things that they're attempting to do in their current tactical business plan to improve their bottom line, you can't know whether you've got products that will increase that bottom line. In other words, add value to their business situation. We redeployed a bunch of folks from other areas of the business to what we call relationship managers. These are people that are out there with your ear to the tracks, out there calling on customers, so more coverage. We're spending 25% more money on education. In fact, our education budget this year for our folks, for those 4,800 folks, will go over $50 million. We run a small university there in Toronto, 55 classrooms, educating the 4,800 people. They will each go through about 3 weeks of education this year compared to an industry standard of 5. And we really believe that's very, very important when you're trying to shift a business, rather than to send somebody a note saying, would you please change your skills, bringing them in and letting them know just exactly what they need to know, teaching them what we need them to know so they know where to fit in the new IBM. We created 13 new business units to focus on niches. We have 4,500 folks approximately now, skilled IBMers delivering training, information, and consultation to our customers. But in addition, we've expanded the franchise. We've gone out and got our own pump house. We have another 10,000 people skilled to deliver value to our customers, people who are our business partners, who are part of our alliances, with a special industry, application, or technology skills. That is getting it out there, folks. That is not sticking it on the shelf somewhere and hoping someone will buy it. Incidentally, and as my last little game here, if you're wondering where customer satisfaction fits in all this, it's a measure of applied values. So we talk about customer satisfaction and quality and value. Customer satisfaction is a measure of applied values. Let's play for a minute here. If you've got in your business 5% market share and 85% customer satisfaction, my question to you is, do you feel that you're in position with your 85%, or let's call it 95% customer sat? Are you in position to win the next order or get the repeat business from that customer on a satisfaction note alone? Who's never driven a Honda Accord? Okay, I'm talking to you folks now. How do you perceive the quality of a Honda Accord? Good? How do you perceive the value of a Honda Accord? Pretty good? What's your satisfaction with a Honda Accord? You can't have any because you've never driven one, right? Now, given your perception of quality and your perception of value, the next time you buy a car, wouldn't you be in the mood to go and take a look at a Honda Accord? No matter what you're driving today, even if you're driving something that you're not at all dissatisfied with? So that next order, that repeat order will be dependent on the public perception of your value and of your quality, not necessarily your customer sat. And I know that's a little bit of heresy. You've got to work on customer satisfaction. That is a strong measure of the propensity of your customer base to rebuy from you. But you've got to work on your image, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We have a heightened sense of the value perceived in our products. In the beginning, it was a forced march away from costs and prices and feeds and speeds and competing with Honeywell and Amdahl and all of the other competitors out there, all the other folks. We are now organized to get closer to our customers and their view of things. What's important to him or her? What value he or she wants from our products, and how to help them derive it. Now, I can't kid you, we're not all the way there yet, but we're getting close. We're in the process of making all these changes. We know we're on the right track. We've got those 1992 results to prove it, and I can't tell you that one dot on a graph makes a line. It certainly doesn't, but I really do believe that we're on the right track. I want to close now by thanking you and thanking Lisa and Catherine and Paul for inviting me here and in participating in this conference, because this is an important conference, I can tell you. As you folks who are still in school think about moving forward and getting into the workforce, you want to think about some of the things that are going on, some of the dynamics that are at work today. It's not building a great high-quality mousetrap. It is taking that mousetrap and making it of very, very high value to the person who buys it. So thank you. I hope some of these thoughts were of interest to you. I'll be here on the panel, and I would guess, Peter, that we go from here to question period.
Yes, in fact, if you just stay there for a minute.
I knew this was going to happen.
What they used to say in the old game show days was, it's time now for the short snappers. Because when we started, we said we'll give 15 minutes each. And I think they're the most complete 15-minute speeches we've ever heard. They each took 25 minutes.
Overquote all the time.
Which according to my schedule gives us around 3 minutes for questions. That's what I make my money at, is trying to keep things brief. So if somebody has a question right now for Duncan, move to the microphone right now. And if not, I've got one, because he mentioned mousetrap there, but he put it in a different way. When I was talking to him earlier, he said the old saying was, build a better mousetrap and people will feed a pat to your door. And I think what he's trying to say here is that, don't we reverse that process then?
That's correct. The point there is, there are at least 5 companies, I mean, I have no idea how I got into this mousetrap thing, Peter, but let's assume for a moment that there are 5 companies in Canada that build spectacular mousetraps, high-quality mousetraps. And now that we're in a global economy with at least NAFTA and probably sooner or later total free trade around the world. There are another 40 countries. Each of them make 5 great mousetraps. You got 200 of them out there. The person that builds great mousetrap number 57 is not going to necessarily be successful because of their perception of the quality and function in their mousetrap. My message is that it is the company that represents the marketing of the company that represents the value to